at all times, energy flows into us, through us, and out of us. We are vessels of the infinite.
What I want to say about our thoughts, first and foremost, are the problem with our thoughts is that we have so many. They reckon we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. Now, I'm not sure who's counting them, but I know on some days I certainly clock up those, and then maybe other days I don't. But in or around, we have tens of thousands of thoughts in any given day. The danger with our thoughts is we become so used to thinking by ourselves that sometimes we don't even hear our thoughts. Sometimes we're not even aware of the amount of thoughts or the nature of the thoughts or the words we're using going through our mind. And that becomes dangerous because now it's almost like we have this unrestricted access to our world. We're allowing everything to come in and we have no filter to stop or to guide or to check. So that's the first thing about our thoughts, is we have so many in any given day that sometimes we become unaware of what exactly is in there. So when we start to stop and examine our thoughts and become conscious that we are thinking beings, the first thing I want to ask is, what's the nature of your thoughts? So if you imagine a young child, if you imagine that you have a young child that's 4 or 5 and they've spent an hour and they're after painting a beautiful picture and they're really, really proud of the picture. But of course the child is young and they think they're after painting the most beautiful house in the world. But it really doesn't look like a house, and it's the child's interpretation of a house, and they've coloured outside the lines and the windows too big and too small, but they can't see that. They just see it as a beautiful picture. So they run into you and they're all excited, and what they want to say is, "Mammy, Mammy, Daddy, Daddy, look at my picture." And they're so proud. Imagine if you looked at that picture. Imagine if your response was, the windows are too big, the door's in the wrong place, the roof is wrong, that's coloured outside the lines. Why didn't you colour on the inside? You could have done that better. Rip that up and start again. Can you imagine the impact that would have on that child? Just think about that for 1 second. What would the impact those words would have? Is that child more likely to go away and really try again and enjoy? Do you think that what you've said is inspiring them to become an artist, to believe in themselves? So the first thing I want to say about words or thoughts are words. And just because you're saying it to yourself, don't be under the illusion that no one's listening. Sometimes we think it's okay to say things to ourselves because nobody is listening. But somebody is listening. You're listening. And your unconscious mind is listening to every single thing you think, every word that goes through your head. I should have done that. I could have done better. I made a mess of that. I'm not good enough. And it's listening and absorbing all of that. And don't forget that we all have that inner child inside. So everything we allow to run through our mind, every thought, every word we allow, we're actually saying it to our inner child. And it has an immediate impact. And the things we think about, the things we allow ourselves to say to ourselves about ourselves, either spring us forward where we want to do more, try again, have fun, or just like the child, we go away and say, well, maybe I'm not good enough. I won't try that again. It is amazing how many people have dreams and ambitions that they've never even tried. And when you sit and talk to them and you ask them why, they actually taught themselves out of it. Not even talked themselves out of it. They taught themselves out of it. So in my mind, we have different people in our head. We have the dreaming self. And the dreaming self says, I'd love to do something. That's our first thought. And then our planning self kicks in and says, yeah, I think I could do that. And you start to make a little plan. Thirdly, our doubting self starts to come in. And the doubting self says, I don't know if you can do that. That's very hard. I don't know if you've ever done that before. And what if you failed? And then if you failed, people would laugh at you. And very quickly, if we entertain the doubting self in our thoughts long enough, the fourth thinking self comes in. And the last thinking self is the quitting self. And the quitting self says, yeah, that probably won't work out. You're right. That won't be good enough. And if you fail, you're going to feel terrible. So the best thing you can do is not try. And it's amazing how many of us can go through that 4 steps of thinking very, very quickly. Some people will have the dreaming self. And after a little while, the planning self will start to kick in. And the doubting or the quitting self might sneak in, but they have the power, they have the mental strength, they have the inner resilience built up, so they can say to the quitting self, no, I'm not quitting, I'm trying, I'm doing this again. But if we haven't built up a way of thinking, if we're not observing, if we're not asking ourselves, which voice is speaking to me now? Where are my thoughts coming from? Are they coming from my dreaming self, my planning self, my doubting self, or my quitting self? And if we're not aware, we could be listening to the doubting and the quitting self. And once we start to listen to those voices, our actions follow. So that's the first thing I want to say about our thoughts. Don't ever think that nobody is listening. There is somebody very important listening to everything you say, every thought you entertain, every word you allow run through your mind. And it is you and your inner child who has all those dreams and all those ambitions is listening to everything you think about. So I want you to start to become aware of, what am I thinking about? And by the nature of these thoughts, is it my dreaming self that I'm giving permission to? Is it my planning self? Or is it my doubting self and my quitting self? And when you begin to challenge the thoughts of your doubting and quitting self, when you start to really challenge those and you start to give more time and more energy to the dreaming and the planning self, it is amazing how your outer actions start to change. The second thing I want to say about thoughts are emotions also. So we've learned through schematic constructs, the brain has this incredible way of learning an experience, hearing a word, and then attaching an emotion to that. So certain words that we use will instantly trigger an emotion. So the words crisis, pandemic, deadline, straight away we can feel our heart rate coming up. It activates the limbic part of the brain, which is the stress part of the brain, and we start to release cortisol. So certain words have an instant emotional and biochemical impact on the body. And then other words like love, connection, peace, trigger a different part of the brain. So when we start to listen to our thoughts, ask yourself, what emotion, what chemicals, what part of the brain are those thoughts allowing to come forward? Each thought we have puts us into an emotional space. And when we become into an emotional place of fear or threat or deprivation, our prefrontal cortex shuts down and it opens up our limbic brain. And now we're back into unconscious programs. And the minute we go into unconscious programs, now we can't think in new ways, we can't act in new ways, we can't see the world for what it is. We begin to see the world through our old lens of old thinking. And we start to repeat what we've always done. So the thoughts you have create an emotional response. The emotional response triggers which part of the brain you can and can't use. And now you're trying to do something new, you're trying to create a new life, you're trying to be inspired, but you're using old networks and it simply won't work. So we have to be careful about which thoughts we select and which words we use. And that allows us then to stay in a more calm space, in a more enlightened state. We're acting from a place of love. So every now and again, when you start to observe your own thoughts, just ask yourself, what's the emotion that's driving these thoughts? And we know that thinking, feeling is a cycle. So how we think impacts how we feel. How we feel impacts how we think. So if we're stuck or fixated in a thinking process that's negative, that's fear-based, we have to do something. We have to come up with something that creates an emotion bigger than the emotion that's changing that thought. So there's a lovely expression that says, we can't think outside our emotion. So the minute I feel anxious, then that emotion fires an electrical circuit into my brain, and the only thoughts I'm allowed to think about is every single thing that I know about being sad or anxious. So I feel an emotion, and then I'm only allowed to think about the things I know about that. It is very hard to think your way out of an emotion, believe it or not. So what we have to do sometimes is we know we have a mind-body-spirit connection. So sometimes if we find it hard to shake off a thought or to move out of a thought, what we can do is start to move our body. And when we start to move our body, it's amazing, it engages a different part of our mind. If it's yoga, if it's running, we start to bring in some balancing. It really starts to, the minute you start to focus on balance, and opens your prefrontal cortex, and the minute your prefrontal cortex opens, now you have a different nature of thoughts. So sometimes we sit in a thought process that's not positive, that's not negative, that's really not helping us. And if we sit there and try to change the thinking without changing anything else, it doesn't work. So for me, on some of the days where my thought process aren't very healthy, sometimes I will just get myself into a boxing session or a yoga session, or I will go to the sea and jump in, or change my physical environment. And we need to know that all of our thoughts are impacted by our body. All of our thoughts impact the chemicals that we're releasing into the body. Your thoughts have the ability to tighten your body. If we think anxious and fearful thoughts, our body language changes. If we think angry thoughts, we clench our fists, our bodies tighten. If we think sad thoughts, we start to cry. So we know that every thought triggers an emotion, and that emotion triggers a physical response. But what I'm saying is the opposite will then work. So if you become aware that you're anxious or you're angry and you're tight, if you find it hard to get out of an angry thought, forget the thought for a second and start to move the body. So you start to relax the body. You start to change your breath. And by changing the physical, now you start to change the emotion, and start to change the emotion, you change your thought. So just be aware that we think, we feel, and we act. And it is a cycle. And sometimes, for some reason, we just get trapped in a thought process that's unhealthy. And it's difficult to think your way out of that. So we can move a way out of that. We can dance a way out of that. We can sing a way out of that. If anybody's ever had a negative thought, or a thought that they just can't get out of their head, and then you strip off your clothes and you jump into the sea and the icy cold water hits you, don't tell me that your thought process hasn't changed instantly. So just think about each thought fires a neurocircuitry in the brain, and each neurocircuitry in the brain is linked to an emotional charge. So that mind-body-spirit connection is really, really important. The next thing I want to say about thoughts, believe it or not, is thoughts are energy. So thoughts are vibrations. So just like the emotion, thoughts have a vibration frequency to it. And that vibration frequency impacts and affects us on a physical level. So it impacts our atoms. It impacts everything that's going on in our system, because deep down we are all energy. The second thing is, because it is energy, and energy can pass through matter, the moment I start to feel and think about something, that energy, that brainwave, doesn't just stay inside my body, it passes out of my body. So somebody beside me can start to feel. If I start to think about negative things, they can feel that. And the same thing happens when I think about positive things. When I start to use words that are really inspiring. When I start to focus on solutions and not problems. When I start to speak of things only that I can control, I feel empowered. And the more I start to operate and think from that vibration frequencies, the more I put that frequency into the universe. And then the more I put that into the universe, the universe comes back and meets me with that. So we are thinking beings, and every thought has a physical reaction. But we are also energy beings, and every thought we have vibrates and changes our vibration frequency. The vibration frequency that I'm vibrating at has a massive impact on how the universe comes to meet me, the type of people that want to be in my space. And it is amazing how when we start to change our thinking, then we change our frequency. And the tagline that we have for our business, Soul Space, is change your thinking, change your frequency, change your world. And the reason I'm so passionate about that is I really believe that much of the universe is responding to my vibration frequency. I really believe that much of what happens in my outer world is a reflection of what's happening on my inner world. And the way I explain this is, if you imagine you're driving along in a car and it's a really beautiful sunny day, and you're looking out through the windscreen and you can see the sunshine, you can see the blue skies, and you know somehow it's warm. But in your car you have the air conditioning on, set for ice cold, and the inside of the car is freezing. Now everything in your body, every cell in your body, every physiological process of your body, every neurochemical process in your body is responding to the temperature in the car and not the temperature in the outside world. And our mind is exactly the same as that car. We think our mind is responding to the outside world, but it's not. Because the only thing we receive from the outside world is signals. Albert Einstein said the only things that exist in the universe is energy and information. All we get from the outside world is colors, sound, smells. We see the world, we get information from the world, but it is actually our mind and our brain that gets that information and puts it all together, and it interprets it in a certain way. And believe it or not, it is our interpretation of that information that triggers our response, chemically, neurochemically, and physiologically. And we think sometimes that it's the outside world that's causing us stress. We think at times that it's the outside world that's chaotic, but it's not. And what I absolutely believe is, just like in that car, your thoughts are more powerful than the outside world. Because when we get locked into a way of thinking, when we start to create an internal picture of reality, in psychology we call that picture, we call it pattern matching. We have set a picture of reality that we believe to be true. And after a little while, that picture becomes unconscious, to the point where we don't even know it's a picture anymore, but it's both a picture and a contract. And that inner picture, that inner environment, becomes something that we are absolutely committed to staying inside, because your unconscious mind does not want change. It's like the person driving in the car. They know they're cold, but they don't want to get out of the car. The car is comfortable, and the car is getting them from A to B. The unconscious mind is a little bit like that. It's not always the greatest place to be. It can be cold, but it gets you from A to B, and we don't want to get out of it. But as long as we stay in those unconscious programs and stay within the limits of our own thoughts, then our outside world will never change. And what we do then is we look out into the universe. And the conscious mind is only allowed to scan the universe and pick out the cues and stimulus and pieces of information that match our inner picture. It is amazing, and there's all types of examples where I'm sure some of us seen where you have a paragraph of words and every word is spelled wrong except the first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter in every word is right. And for the first time you look at it, you think, I can't read this. And for a split second, your brain starts to look at words and it goes back into the past and it scans anything that was familiar. And before you know it, you start to read the paragraph. You start to see words that are not actually on the sheet, because now you're reading from memory. It is amazing. There's another one done recently where somebody has wrote a paragraph just using letters or just using numbers. There's not a single letter in it. And I sat with my wife and myself, and we both had a good laugh at it, because for the split second you look at this garbage and you're saying, what's this? But then your brain somehow starts to get shapes and it starts to put a context together, and before you know it, your brain has superimposed a letter. It has superimposed, now the 3 is an E. The 7 is a T. And we have an ability to superimpose what we believe should be there onto what is actually there. And that is the power of our thoughts. We create an inner picture. We create an inner story. We create an inner dialogue, and we run it and replay it again and again and again to the point where that is all we can see. It is amazing how much of our world is actually us superimposing our vision of reality into what's happening. And that's why many of us could be at the same meeting. Many people listening to this talk might go away and say, that was a terrible talk. I hated when he said that it's like driving a car through traffic lights. And then someone's going to say, he never mentioned traffic lights. And the other person said, no, he definitely did. Everybody will take something different away from this talk. And sometimes what I say won't be what you hear. And that is the greatest trick our mind plays on us. Because your mind, your unconscious mind, is simply conditioned to keep you safe, keep you surviving. It doesn't want you to thrive. It doesn't want excellence. Your unconscious mind, your unconscious thought process is committed to the familiar, to the old. It doesn't want anything else. And that's why at times we tend to end up back in the same place. We go on a diet and it works for a little while and 6 months later we're back. We start a relationship and it's all new and it's exciting and this is finally going to be a relationship that works, and 6 months later it ends just like the last one. Did anybody ever notice something in their life that seems to just keep happening? And when I ask people, because there's lots of stuff in my life where it keeps happening and I have to sit down and sometimes ask, what's going on here? Why is everybody out there the same? Why is every situation out there the same? And then somebody asks the question, or I ask the question to my clients. Well, if you look at all these different relationships you had with different people, all these different jobs you had with different companies, all these different houses that you lived in, what was the one common denominator? And it's amazing, the one common denominator was me. You. And it was your thinking that created the relationship end. It was your thinking that created the reality. And I've never, after 20 years of research and study and working with live cases on this, I've never been more certain that so much of what we experience in the world has very little to do with what's happening out in the external world. It is more to do with what's happening in our inner world. And what is happening in our inner world is being driven by the thoughts that we are allowing, by the words that we are allowing to run through our mind. Every word has meaning. Every word has a vibration frequency. And that vibration frequency affects every cell in my body. It switches on genes for threat. It downregulates and switches off genes for healing and digesting and rest. But that vibration frequency isn't just doing that in my own world. It's transmitting outside and beyond me. And it's sending that vibration frequency into the universe. And if I'm sending a vibration frequency out to the universe of lack, limitation, stress, anger, it's no wonder I'm not meeting the man of my dreams or the girl of my dreams. It's no wonder I can't get into my dream job. It's no wonder things don't happen for me. Because the things that you want you. But they only want you when you turn up as you should do. It's like two magnets. If the magnets are aligned, they connect. If the magnets are turned, they repel. So sometimes if you find it hard, if you find sometimes things just aren't working out, things just seem to go against me, I just seem to have bad luck. Why does this always happen to me? Ask yourself, could it be me? And what if I was to change my thinking? What if I was to change my language? What if I was to stop talking about stuff I can't control? What if I was to stop saying things that no longer serve me? What if I was to stop comparing myself to others? What if I was to stop to judging myself and others? And when we start to bring that level of focus, we become more focused on the here and now in this moment. And we start to ask ourselves questions. What's the kindest I can be to myself and others right now? What's the one thing I can do right now to move me one step closer to my dreams? What's the one thing I can do that shows people who I am, despite what's happening outside of me? Because in life, we're not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by how we choose to respond. So what if I was to stop blaming? And what if I was to really understand that everything I feel, everything that my physiological and my biochemical body is responding to has nothing to do with the outside world. It's like the person driving the car. I'm simply responding to the temperature that I have set in my own unconscious mind. I am simply living within the limits of my unconscious beliefs. And I am absolutely certain that the limits of most of our lives are simply the limits of our unconscious mind. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. That is the power of our thoughts. It is never mind over matter, but I am absolutely certain it is mind becomes matter. That which we allow to exist and persist in our mind impacts and becomes our physical body and our physical world. So, the starting point is become aware. Become aware of your thoughts. And ask yourself, are these thoughts helpful? Are they useful? Are they kind? Are they compassionate? Ask yourself, which part of me are having these thoughts? Is it my dreaming self? My planning self? My doubting self? Or my quitting self? And how long more am I willing to listen to that person? Ask yourself deep down, do I know, is this the life I dream about right now? Is this the life you've dreamed about? Can you see it, the life you dream about? Can you see it in great detail? Can you visualize it? Have you wrote it down? Have you drawn it? Can you see it and experience it to the point where you believe it's real? Because until you believe it's real, but until you can feel it, not just from a neurocircuitry thinking point of view, but from an emotional point of view, when you can feel the life you want, your mind and your body starts to set up the infrastructure you need for that life. Is this the life you want? Can you see and feel the life you dream of? Are you willing to observe and police your own thoughts? Are you willing to stand up to yourself, for yourself, and create better hygiene around thoughts? And finally, the key to all of this is taking time to stop and observe. We can't be so busy rushing and racing and so busy on the outside world that we never take time to stop and listen. In life, we have to move from the experience to the observer. So we take time through yoga or through meditation or through exercise or maybe sitting with a friend and just asking, how am I feeling? What's the thoughts that's driving me right now? How long have I been fixated on that thought? Is it helping and serving me well? Would I like to change it, and how do I change it? And as I said, changing thoughts is simply, it could be listening to affirmations like Louise Hay, it could be an incredible meditation, it might be jumping in the sea, it might be doing some exercise, it could be yoga, sometimes it's thinking differently, it's changing your thought process, and sometimes you need more than that. You need to change your physical environment, or you need to change your physical movement, because how we think, how we feel, and how we act are all linked. And we can go from one to the other, or we can repeat the process. So we're almost out of time, so I hope in some ways that was really important, really helpful for some people. You can see I'm really passionate about it. It's a really important topic for me. Believe it or not, this weekend I've started writing my own book after many years of putting it off, and I've actually began, and I'm really enjoying the process. And it's a real passionate book, but the book starts with 3 stories about my life, where I got to a stage in my life where I thought there was no meaning in it, there was no purpose, I was useless, and I didn't want to live anymore. And that's where my book starts. And I'd gone to different doctors and I'd gone to everybody on the outside telling me what I should do, trying to bring meaning into my life, trying to give me something to live for. And along the way, I realized that I was the only one that could bring meaning into my life. And that I was the one that could fix me. And when we start to take responsibility for our own life, when we start to begin to see the beauty in our own self, when we begin to express compassion to ourselves, and when we begin to realize that we are not a mistake, we are not here to play small, and we realize that we are part of this incredible, created, infinite universe, and we are not here to play small, I began to think different. And the moment I started to think different and challenge my thoughts and unlock my unconscious belief, the moment I changed my inner world, it transformed me. And I've 7 discoveries that I've made along the way. So that'll be the book. It's 3 stories about me on 3 different occasions coming to a stage where I thought my life and me was invaluable. And then something trick. And I discovered 7 ways of thinking, 7 ways of being, 7 ways of connecting everything that is. And I hope in all of that, this might either start your journey or help you keep on this journey, because the journey of self-discovery, the journey of understanding your own thoughts, and the journey of understanding the infinite ability that your thoughts have, it's the most remarkable, it's the most amazing journey you'll ever go on. And in a world where physical space is getting more and more crowded, rest assured that the inner space is infinite. And all the great discoveries over the next 20 years are going to happen around the human mind and the human spirit. And we're going to realize that just like there's an infinite universe outside of us, there's actually an infinite universe inside our own mind. And in that infinite universe, you can be anything you want to be, with any life you want to have, and feel what you want to feel. I hope that has really helped. Thank you so much for joining me. And just let you know, tomorrow night on the Soul Space, I think it's at @soulspace_experience. I'm doing a live meditation at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. I do one every Sunday night. If you'd like to join me, if you'd like to get any more of our things, my own page at Gerry Hussey or at Soul Space, we've loads of free stuff on there about meditation and my own talks and my own beliefs. So really hope you enjoy that. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the day. I'm looking across here. I see Miriam has our little man fed and he's asleep. So maybe we'll go for a walk, or maybe I'll sit down and get on to the next chapter of this book. It's only taken me 20 years to get around to writing it. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a really great day. And thank to Wellfest for organising a really great weekend. Lots of great speakers and for a great cause. Thank you, everybody.